Hello, welcome to Bored with Paint. Today I'll be showing you how to paint Jason Vorhees from Terrified, the fan-made reskin of the game Horrified. This is a full conversion of the game featuring some of the greatest slashers in movie history. Check out the Board Game Geek link on the screen for more details. I'll also stick it down in the description. The miniatures themselves are exclusively available from the UNB10 Etsy shop. You can find a link to this in the description as well. Here's the Jason miniature, and as you can see, I've already given him a zenithal prime by covering the entire miniature in black and spraying white from above. This sculpt appears to depict Jason at the end of the third Friday the 13th movie, so I'll be basing the paint job on that design. We'll start off painting Jason's skin, and I'm using Cadian Fleshtone for this. The only bits of skin on him are his hands and the part of his head that's exposed behind the mask. This is a pretty standard skin tone, and I'm using it because Jason at this point has not been buried and come back to life and become a supernatural killing machine. He's still pretty much just a regular human at this point. Due to the size and the fact that the details are not very strong, you'll want to use as thin a paint as you can get away with. It's always better to put multiple coats down than to put it on too thick and hide some of the details. In the third movie, Jason appears to be wearing some light brown pants, so we will paint his pants using Karak Stone. Next, we'll go in with some black and fill in the eye holes on the mask. You could alternatively try to paint flesh and some actual eyes on him, but ain't nobody got time for that. For his shoes, I'm using Vallejo model color German Camo black brown. Next, I'm painting the handle of the machete with some black gray. Now we'll paint the entirety of the hockey mask using Ivory, being sure to avoid the eye holes. We'll come back later and spend a lot of time refining the mask. Now we'll paint Jason's shirt, and I didn't really have a color that quite matched what I saw in the movie photos, so I started off mixing some Deathworld Forest with some Scalecolor Hellbound Flesh, but I decided it needed a little more blue, so I added some Scalecolor Innsmouth Blue to the mix. If you don't want to mess around mixing colors, find any old desaturated light green, and that should do the trick. Now we'll get the black back out and paint the straps on the hockey mask. And we'll finish up the base coat by painting the blade of the machete with Vallejo metal color silver. The Vallejo metal color can be kind of hard to find, so feel free to use any kind of steel or silver color for this. Most of it's going to end up getting covered in blood anyway. Now we'll start highlighting the shirt by going back to our trio of base colors and just lightening it with more of the Hellbound Flesh. I do add a touch more blue just to keep it from getting too green. Now we'll just use this to cover all of the upward facing areas of the shirt and also to hit any of the folds of the fabric. We'll also want to hit the pockets and the collar with this. Now we'll lighten the mix a little bit more and do another pass, hitting exactly the same areas we did last time, but trying to cover a slightly smaller area. I'm not really trying that hard to get smooth blends here. We're going to be adding a wash in a later step, and the miniature is just so small that those details are not going to be visible on the tabletop. Now we'll perform the same process on the pants by mixing some ivory into the Karak Stone. Once again, we're hitting any of the upturned areas and the tops of any of the folds of fabric. And here I'm adding more ivory to lighten it for a second highlight. And rinse and repeat. Now we'll highlight the boots by mixing some ivory into the German Camo black brown. This is just going to be applied to the upper parts of the shoes and on a little bit of the back that's visible. We won't be touching the lower sides and the soles of the shoes here. And we'll boost the highlight slightly by mixing in a little bit more ivory. I don't recall Jason's little shack having a washing machine, so we're going to dirty up his clothes by giving his entire body, except for the face and skin, a wash of Agrax Earthshade. You can pretty much just slather this on everywhere. I'm just trying to brush it away if it tends to pool on any of the flat surfaces. Now we'll do that same process just on the skin using Reikland Fleshshade. Washes take a little while to dry, so we'll use this opportunity to paint the base. I've decided to use Orcish Dermis from Scalecolor. This seems to match the sort of salmony pinkish color that the card artwork uses. This is thin paint, so I ended up applying about 5 coats. Once all the washes are dry, we can start applying some highlights to the skin, starting with Cadian Fleshtone. This will go on any upturned areas, and we'll also use it to pick out the fingers, being careful to stay away from the dark area we created with the shade in between the fingers. Now we'll move up to his head, and we'll highlight anything that isn't covered by the strap. I'm trying to leave some darkness around the edges, though. For a second highlight on the skin, we'll lighten up the Cadian Fleshtone with some Kislev Flesh. We'll then apply this to pretty much the same places we applied it before, but trying to cover a slightly smaller area so we get a little bit of gradation down to the dark areas. I'm still hitting the fingers with this, even though they're facing down. While this isn't realistic in terms of the way the light would be hitting the miniature, it does help make the hands more readable. Now we'll move back up to the head, make sure we get his little ear here. Next, we'll mix some ivory into the black and use this to highlight the mask strap. And we'll mix a little more ivory to do a second highlight. Now we'll return to the mask and apply a wash of Seraphim Sepia. This will provide the mask with a bit of a yellowish tint and will make it look dirty like it does in the movie. Notice I'm trying to let it concentrate around the outside of the mask where it would be dirtiest. If it starts to pull where you don't want it, just hit it with a clean brush and it'll suck that right up. Now for the fun part. We're going to pull out our blood for the blood god and throw this on his machete. I'm just trying to make an irregular pattern here and not trying to cover up all of the metal. Next, I'll put some blood on the base like it was dripping off of the blade. I'm starting off drawing a little bit of a line right under the blade, and then feathering it outwards to give it some more volume. Then I follow up with some random dots here and there. Now we'll do some splatter effects. Here I'm loading up kind of a bigger brush with the blood from the blood god, and I'm going to use my finger and kind of fling it at Jason from a few inches away. This should put little drops randomly all over him. You can see some drops got on random parts of the base. I'm just going to leave it there because I think it looks awesome. Now for probably the most difficult part of the miniature, painting the mask details. We'll start off by thinning down some red with some flow improver, wicking off any excess on a paper towel, and then we'll use this to sort of block in the red triangle and the red stripes on the side of the mask. I'm purposely making my shapes larger than I need them to be. We'll go in later with some of the ivory and clean this up. I feel like it's hard in this video to see just how small this miniature is. The miniatures for Terrified are actually much smaller than the standard 25 or 28mm figures you would see in war games or other board games. I'm really approaching the upper limit of my skill level by painting the small details at this scale. If it were any other miniature, I'd say forget it, but this is Jason we're talking about. It's a bit messy, but we'll fix it. Now we'll go in with some black ink and fill in all the little air holes on the mask. Some of the holes appear to be sculpted, but a lot of the detail is lost in the print. So I'm pretty much just placing these based on stills from the movie. I eventually gave up trying to make dots and decided to just draw lines. I felt that it would be easier to go in later with some ivory and clean them up to look like dots. The location of the air holes change between movies sometimes, so I wouldn't sweat it too much trying to get them in the exact right spots. Now here I'm going back to the ivory and using this to refine the lines and dots we did in the previous step. This was just a lot of fiddling back and forth, trying to get ultra thin lines with the ivory, going back in with black ink and fixing it when we messed up. I don't include the entire process on camera because it's pretty boring, but I think I've shown enough here to give you the gist. I was doing this under magnification, and you can see throughout this whole video, actually, that my magnifiers were getting in the way. I was also experimenting with a new camera placement, which doesn't seem to have worked out that well. As I go through and fix the little air holes, I'm also using this opportunity to highlight the mask with the ivory. This mainly involves covering the central area and the nose. Remember, the outer edge we want to leave more yellow. And here I'm using the ivory to clean up the red designs that are on the mask. At some point, I felt like this was good enough to call it done. I thought if I spent any more time on it, I'd end up messing it up worse. However, there was one last detail I wanted to add. Near the end of the third Friday the 13th movie, Jason ends up suffering from a bad case of axe to the face. This ends up putting a big gash in his mask that I believe is sculpted in here, although like I said, the details are pretty hard to pick out. I decided to go all in on this and add some really dark red around the area. Then I followed that up by covering the area in some blood for the blood god. Finally, to simulate some bruising around the area, I thinned down some Druchii Violet wash and applied that around the outside. And here I'm finalizing the mask by reapplying some of the Seraphim Sepia wash, where I think the highlight got a little too strong. This should dirty it back up and provide a little bit of shading. And here we have Jason Vorhees. Here's a zoom in on just the head so you can see all that work we did at the end there. Certainly not perfect at this level of zoom, but I think it looks pretty good overall. Thanks again for watching Board with Paint. If you made it this far and you haven't subscribed already, I'd appreciate you going down there, clicking that button, clicking the bell, leaving a like. You know how this all works. I am on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You can follow me there. I'll sometimes post some updates on works in progress. Anyways, until next time, happy painting.